My goal would be really to end street homelessness. To end street homelessness. There'll still be people in shelters and...
We have this hotel room for you. Go into that shelter and don't be publicly visible.
Say, oh, they're just cleaning up this place because all those fancy leaders are coming into town. That's true, because it's true.
The devil sets it in your head that, like, you know what, nobody wants you. Nobody wants you at their house. Nobody wants to give you a place to stay. Nobody loves you, and look at you're in a shelter. Nobody loves you, and look at you're in a shelter.
Today, many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps.
Newsom hired like his own photographer to travel around with him, like this like Hollywood-based photographer. So that's our taxpayer dollars paying for this.
Nobody who is close to being rational would do anything like what we in Los Angeles have been doing now for close to 40 years.
The blatant thievery.
Welcome to SweptAwayLA, where we bring you the untold truths of the care crisis in Los Angeles.
We're here to shed light on the harsh realities of LA's homelessness crisis, because in the city full of stars, we can't afford to let these stories fade into the background.
We're diving deep into the issues, the policies, and the people on the front lines. The truth is here to stay, and so are we.
Stick with us as we challenge the status quo, spark real conversations, and work towards lasting solutions, because this is a crisis we can't afford to sweep under the rug.
I'm your host, NIka Soon-shiong, and I'm joined by my co-host, Ysenia.
And this is SweptAwayLA. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to SweptAwayLA, the podcast where we dive deep into the real struggles of homelessness in Los Angeles. I'm one of your hosts, Ysenia, and today we're uncovering a harsh reality: Los Angeles County supportive housing system, despite years of effort, has left over 75,000 people still unhoused. Why? Because the system was built to fail from the very beginning. In this episode, NIka sits down with Gary Blasi, professor at UCLA School of Law and longtime advocate for the rights of the unhoused. Gary has seen firsthand the evolution of LA's housing assistance system dating back to when they first started to take shape. As someone who was present during the early development of these systems, Gary has witnessed how they were structured with numerous barriers and bureaucratic hurdles that ultimately hindered any meaningful progress. Rather than offering tangible solutions, these obstacles were deliberately put in place to avoid allocating the necessary funds to effectively house people. Gary has decades of experience working on the front lines of homelessness, from his work with the Legal Aid Foundation in the 1980s to his leadership with the National Coalition for the Homeless. He's been a part of the struggle for fair housing for all and has seen the best and worst of LA's efforts to address homelessness. So let's get into it. Welcome to SweptAwayLA. Go ahead, NIka.
Nobody who is close to being rational would do anything like what we in Los Angeles have been doing now for close to 40 years.
Great. Well, thank you so much again for joining me today. I'm wondering if we could start just by talking a little bit about the trajectory of your career advocating for and researching crisis of housing in LA, and what's changed, what stayed the same, what you're noticing now.
Sure. Well, I'm sort of an accidental lawyer. I never intended to be a lawyer or a law professor, and I didn't go to law school. In the 70s, I had an opportunity to become a lawyer because some friends who were also sort of graduate school dropouts like me discovered that you could become a lawyer without going to law school in California. So I was an apprentice, and I was an apprentice specifically with my colleagues in a storefront office in Echo Park. Basically, the lawyers there sort of supervised us, and we volunteered in exchange. Sort of that was the exchange. And I had done some tenant organizing in Cambridge when I was in graduate school, but wasn't really focused on that when I came to Los Angeles. But in the course of talking to tenants as they came into the community law office, many of them started coming in saying they were getting evicted, and they had gone to the local legal aid office, and the legal aid office had developed a policy that they weren't going to represent anybody. They were just going to give them a packet of papers for them to deal with themselves. And these folks, Echo Park was not the fashionable yuppie place that it is now. It was a working class community, and a lot of the folks couldn't really handle the paperwork. So they asked us if we would help them, and so we did. And that was my sort of introduction, and I worked out and I was interested in doing a little bit more than just doing the paperwork. So I made a deal with one of the lawyers in the office that I would do all the paperwork in these cases, or she would go to court when we had to go to court. So through that, I got to know a lot about low-income housing for poor people, especially in Echo Park. I spent a lot of time at the clients' houses taking pictures of problems and that sort of thing. And then I had so many clients who were people I was helping who were in slum conditions. We decided that we might be able to do something about that. We developed an idea that we could sue slumlords for various common law torts. And so we did. We experimented with some cases, and we won. We got a few $1,000s for tenants, and we got orders for the landlords to deal with the rat problem or the cockroach problem or the plumbing problem, whatever it was. But meanwhile, we had to keep the office open. So, and there weren't enough of those cases to pay the rent. So I got an invitation to go to the Legal Aid Foundation in around 1973, something like that. And so I did. And then I spent the next rest of my career basically working on either housing or homelessness. And that included in around 1983 setting up something at the Legal Aid Foundation called the Eviction Defense Center, where we represented a lot of tenants in eviction cases. At one point, our office was the busiest legal aid office in America in terms of the numbers of clients that we were helping. We were handling about as many as 40 evictions a day with a small staff, and mostly it was helping them do their own paperwork, but we took some of the cases to trial. And so that was satisfying because at least when you won, it was very satisfying because people, their lives were not disrupted, their kids' lives were not disrupted by an eviction. But beginning not too long after we began doing the Eviction Defense Center, tenants started coming back to us who were tenants who had gotten evicted. We couldn't, not every case wins, and saying to us, we got evicted, we can't find another place to live, and we're sleeping in our car, and you help us find something. Is there some kind of shelter system or some place like, the government could, or somebody could help us, church or somebody. So we began putting together a list of resources, which was a pretty short list. And before long, we discovered that every place on that list was full all the time and was turning away people. So I got permission from the executive director of the Legal Aid Foundation to leave the Defense Center and to set up a homelessness prevention and litigation center, or basically to set up an office to focus on that. And we partnered with basically every other legal services organization in Southern California, and with some private lawyers and like the Bar Association and so on, and basically just began doing research. Part of that research included talking to people about what they had tried to do to help themselves. And that was my first encounter with the welfare system and with general relief. I knew about it, but it wasn't an area I worked in. And we fairly quickly discovered that the law that was in effect should have made it impossible for people to be homeless, because a law dating back to the 19th century said that if people had no other means to survive, the counties had to provide assistance to at least keep body and soul together. And so in LA County, that program was called General Relief. And we began then looking at general relief, including going into offices and just talking to people about the experience. And some of our other offices were also doing general relief, legal aid offices, and basically discovered that it was really hard to get on general relief. And if you succeeded, you got $221 a month. So at that time, $221 would get a room in Skid Row for a month if you spent it all on the room. But the real problem was the county had set up systems to keep people from succeeding in the application process. We later discovered through litigation that they had a research and development department, if you will, that would experiment on people applying for general relief to see if there was a way to keep them off. And one of those experiments turned out to be when people, if they did get on general relief, then they would get an envelope from the welfare department with a postcard in it. And the letter with the postcard said, if you want to stay on general relief, return this postcard. And they discovered that 10% of the people wouldn't return the postcard. And so they cut them off. And based on that experiment, they created a policy that everybody had to report routinely. If you didn't report, you got cut off.
Essentially as a way to remove people from.
Yeah, exactly. It was like, they were setting up these valves in this system to control the flow in and out of the caseload of general relief. They had other things. The one that we sued them on, the very first case, had to do with them requiring documentary identification. Mm-hmm. One of the clients that I had interviewed was a young woman who had come from Arkansas and landed at the bus station downtown. She was going to meet the guy that she was going to marry and settle down with out here, but that fell apart. She had nothing, and she got robbed at Union Station at the bus station, and she had been applying for general relief every day for weeks and sleeping in the basement of an abandoned building. So her first problem was she often would not, because of where she was staying, she would not get to the welfare department until later in the day. And when she got there, they would say, all of our homeless appointments have been filled up, come back next week. And she had been there 6 consecutive Mondays and had never even gotten in. And then once she was able to get in, she didn't have a birth certificate. So she got denied because she didn't have a birth certificate. So we, my colleagues and I, sort of came to be known as the homeless litigation team. We filed a case for Cheryl Eisenheim was her name, and a lot of other people. We interviewed a lot of people and ended up filing like maybe 30 or 40 affidavits or declarations of people who had had the same problem, so the judges would know this was not just a single mistake. This was a pattern and practice of outrageous behavior. And we went in for a restraining order against the county, that would order them to see homeless people on the day they came in, and not to impose this documentary identification requirement unless it was the only way they could possibly be identified.
And this general relief stipulations, I want to backtrack a little bit to the fact that general relief is the county's legal obligation. I don't think a lot of people fully know that or understand that this is actually not a choice, but this is the county's legal obligation. And in terms of the dollar amount, the general relief budget table at the county sets out for a family of 4, the maximum grant is $534, with housing $329 a month. For a single person, the maximum general relief grant is $221, with a budget of $136. As anyone can imagine, that's clearly not enough. But we hear from the county there's not enough money, that actually, right-sizing the budgeted amount to be spent to the cost today would bankrupt the county. But
Right.
how can we make sense of that in light of the law?
Well, we sued the county about the inadequate grant amount twice. And the first time we sued them, they agreed to increase the amount to like 300, something like that. As time went by, that was not enough. And so we filed another suit. And that suit was also accompanied by a lawsuit listing 100 ways in which they had, literally 100 ways that they kept people off of general relief, even though it was that low. We settled that case with them, and they agreed to raise the general relief amount to $346. But we settled that case with the county directly with the Board of Supervisors, a couple of the members of the board, and they agreed that they would raise it to $346 a month with an inflation adjustment. Now, had they honored that settlement, the amount of the general relief grant today would be $1,008, because that's the inflation rate since then. But we also found out while we were negotiating with them, they had their lobbying team in Sacramento writing a law that would cap their liability at $221. In other words, they rolled the amount back to what it had been when we first started doing anything. And because most of the people who are on general relief are in Los Angeles, there were no votes, or not enough votes to overcome that. And so that passed, and that's still the law. They're still hiding behind that law that was described by a federal appellate judge in terms that it deserved. It was really a really dishonorable thing for them to have done. So the county, I know, is talking about some sort of reform, but the reform would have to take account of reality.
Mm.
The reality is $221, 100,000 people, more or less, rely on general relief, and almost all of them are homeless. What they use the money for is to recharge their phones so they can stay in touch with family and friends, to buy feminine products or things that they otherwise don't have the money for. Food, they eat better for the first few days after they get that check, and just staying alive. But it doesn't have anything to do with ending homelessness.
Is it possible then to sort of hold the county to what it agreed to do, which is to adjust the amount to inflation, or to peg it to inflation?
Well, we tried. We took it all to the California Supreme Court, and we got 3 of the 4 votes that we needed to have the Supreme Court take it up, and they did not. So it would take the legislature to enact a new law or it would take the supervisors enact a policy and an ordinance that changed those amounts and change that practice.
At the county level, let's just stay there. This idea that there's no money, but we also see a lot of, taxpayer dollars being allocated to police sweeps and efforts like Safer Cities, which actually Island recently started in the late 2000s and concentrated police officers in Skid Row. Can you talk about your work challenging how much we're spending on Safer Cities, and do they keep cities safer?
Well, we know, thanks to Human Rights Watch, basically how much police effort goes in to dealing with homeless people. And by dealing with homeless people, I mean the LA Police Department and the LA Sanitation Department, who never helped anybody get into housing. It's all about moving people from one place to another or putting them in jail. Not so much about putting them in jail because there's no room in the jail for people. So it's basically just harassment and forcing people to go from one place to another. In the period from 2016 to 2022, 38% of all the arrests and citations made by Los Angeles Police Department officers were of homeless people. Homeless people comprise about 1% of the LA population, but they're 40% of the people who get arrested or cited. And for some infractions or misdemeanors, 100% of the people arrested for drinking in public were homeless during that period. 99% of the people arrested for or cited for littering were homeless. And you might say, why are they doing that? Well, they're doing that because if you cite somebody, they have to sign something saying they will appear in court by a certain day. And if they don't, a warrant for their arrest will issue. So for each of those citations for drinking in public that goes to warrant, the next time they get encountered, they can go straight to jail. And basically, they can be searched as incident to their arrest. And basically, it gives the police a lot more power over people. So if you can imagine 40% of the police department's budget, which is well over $1 billion, and it goes to other things besides arresting people and harassing people, but a lot of it goes toward doing things that are counterproductive to dealing with the homeless situation. They may solve the problem in front of one homeowner's house because they'll force the person to go a block away, but they haven't done anything about the problem. And meanwhile, you've used the time of police officers who could actually be dealing with crime. And we wouldn't need to be hiring a lot more police officers if the ones we have were actually addressing crime as opposed to harassing homeless people. So it fits in with the over-policing. And I have to say also at this point that racism is a core part of this. In Los Angeles County, if you are Black, and that's the only thing that I know about you, I know that you are between 6 and 8 times as likely to be homeless as if you were white. And that's true of all of these arrest statistics too. Black people, especially Black men, are the biggest victims of all of these harassing laws. And they're the people that pay the price, and that's consequently why they're the majority of people on the street, in addition to the fact that they don't have an income to obtain housing by some other means. So if you were, if you dropped in from some rational place and were said, here's the problem we have people living in tents on the street, that's not acceptable. Nobody who is close to being rational would do anything like what we in Los Angeles have been doing now for close to 40 years. And maybe that's why we still have the problem. I mean, that could be.
And I was looking through a report that you wrote, I think in the early 2000s, that compared the concentration of police on Skid Row to the concentration of police in Baghdad. And I'm wondering if you could speak to why that comparison and what would that comparison look like today?
Well, they're not concentrated in Skid Row as much as they were. That was an effort by our then mayor, basically to clean up Skid Row because the story is, and I don't have any physical evidence of this, that a bunch of people interested in developing the land east of downtown had gone to Wall Street and tried to put together a lot of money. And they were told by Wall Street, not until you get rid of Skid Row. And so his response to that was the Safer Cities Initiative. And Safer Cities Initiative did the following. Skid Row is about 50 square blocks. The city of Los Angeles is 500 square miles. And during this initiative, the police department put an additional 55 officers in this area, one cop per block additional. And they moved basically every narcotics officer in the police department to Skid Row, basically to set up stings of people by entrapping them into committing some drug crime. And they did that partly because the misdemeanors were not getting people in jail long enough, because they were getting kicked out after 24 hours, and they wanted to send people to state prison. So they developed a program of going up to undercover officers, going up to people in Skid Row and saying to them, I have some money, I want a rock of cocaine, can you help me? And sometimes a person would say, I could help you if you would give me some, because there was a lot of addiction on Skid Row. And the person would say, okay, here's $20, and you can have, the $10 worth. And as soon as that transaction went down, about 9 officers would jump on that person. And that person was then tried for distribution of drugs, not use. So the district attorney simultaneously, maybe not accidentally, developed a policy that there would be no pleas for cases from Skid Row. And the files, the criminal files in the court system started using orange jackets for arrests in Skid Row. And the public defenders and the district attorneys, they knew if it was in an orange file, there was not going to be any deal. And we estimated that they sent 2,000 ordinary addicts into the state prison system for a distribution of drugs. They spent an average of probably a year and a half to 2 years in the state prison system and came out worse than when they went in. So again, these things sound like, a script as opposed to what actually happened. But I couldn't make this stuff up, but they made it up for real.
And how do you, we can think about the Olympics as perhaps another event where a lot of people in LA are expecting, enhanced levels of police surveillance, of violence against the unhoused community. I'm wondering how you would relate new initiatives or sort of seemingly new initiatives like Inside Safe to this history that LA has experienced, but perhaps not learned from, of initiatives like Safer Cities.
Well, in concept, Inside Safe makes some sense. The things about it that make sense is you get people into some kind of housing right away. And the other thing that makes sense is that you move whole encampments together, because the two things that people most need, one is either money or housing, but the other thing everyone needs is some social connection. And for many people, the people in the camp are the only friends they have. And so it's easier to get people to accept moving to a renovated hotel or a hotel that's been leased out, motel for the most part. So that part makes sense. But They're paying $3,500 a month for those motel rooms, and very few people are leaving those hotel rooms for actual housing. So, and this is no secret to anyone. I mean, they have a dashboard that tells you this. You can go on the web, Inside Safe website, and see how many people have been housed. And through all the hundreds of millions of dollars they've gone through so far, it's, I think, less than 400. So at that rate, unless the Olympics were moved back by 3 or 4 decades, you can't get there from here. So that the system has to change. And the only two things they can do are something that's a systemic change, one piece of which is the things that you and I have talked about in terms of giving people a basic income to use in the informal housing market to arrange their own housing. And that will work for about half of the homeless population, for sure. And the other thing is that they have to find some place for people to go, at least interim, during that period. But the concern is that that will cost more money, and they won't be able to get that money from the feds, but they will be able to get security money from the feds. I think that concern is do what they did for the earlier Olympics, which is use the cops to move everybody out of sight. The problem is there's just a lot more unhoused people now than there were then. And the only way they could do that would be to set up some sort of camps somewhere and force people into those camps.
Can you speak a little bit to whether or not this moment when housing is so top of mind in elections and also as we lead up to the Olympics, would you say that there's more hope for general relief reform or perhaps less hope in terms of challenging the role of law enforcement?
I think those two things would have to go together. I think some of that money that's now being given to police officers to police homeless people, for the amount of money that it costs to arrest, process one unhoused person, you could probably house that person for a couple of months. And probably ultimately, though, given how long this problem has festered, there's no way to get out of it within a reasonable period without some additional money from the state or the federal government. We've been on a downhill slide for 40 years. I mean, if you can imagine, if $221 was $1,008 today, we wouldn't have a housing problem.
I really believe in the power of just giving people money directly without having to follow up, without having to check where they spent it or verify or make them turn in a postcard, at some later date just to make sure that they're still there. And I also know that you've been working on guaranteed income pilots in LA. There's 5 guaranteed income pilots in California specifically targeted at people who are unhoused that are all showing really positive results in terms of people exiting homelessness.
That's right.
And also across the country, we have 155 cash transfer pilots, not to mention general relief, which we have had for quite some time that we know so many people are reliant on, but it just has too many, it has too many stipulations and requirements, et cetera. It's difficult to become enrolled. How can we, use a moment like the Olympics to call for a different kind of narrative, that given the evidence that we have and the things that have and haven't worked in the past?
Well, I think we certainly have the evidence. What we're up against are stereotypes and prejudices that really don't seem to be that affected by evidence. For example, educating people to have some sense of what the world looks like from the perspective of a really, really poor person. And that involves not statistical studies, but narratives and all the ways that you could conceivably build some degree of empathy, because if the people who made these policies spent 20 minutes looking at the world from the perspective of the people whose lives that they're trying to affect, they would do things completely differently. One of the cases we filed against the county was that they made it very difficult for people with disabilities, especially, to apply. The people for whom the program was largely devised. And we had a very conservative judge, and we had all the usual prejudices. And I decided that he needed to see the world from the perspective of our clients. And so I had a paralegal, and I assigned him the job of going through the whole system with this guy, and it was just a random client that we had, and document everything that happened to him. And if he fell off the tracks, put him back on the tracks, but otherwise don't intervene. And he came back with a 30-page description of everything that person had to do. And when we went in to argue for an injunction against the county, which we got, and which is still in place, actually, this conservative judge says, I don't think I could get on general relief. And so, again, it's at the root of all sound public policy is, human empathy and understanding of what the situation actually is, and not interposing our suppositions and prejudices in place of facts.
Well, that's a great place to end. Thank you so much, Gary.
Thank you for joining us today. Gary Blasi's decades of experience has given him a unique perspective on how LA's housing system has been structured to prevent meaningful progress. By stacking up so many barriers, creating unnecessary red tape, they've ensured that resources needed to truly house people have been left untouched. The system was built to fail, and we need to recognize and change that. If you want to be a part of this change and learn more about Gary's work and how we can push for real life change in LA's approach to houselessness, check out the links in the show notes. We'll be back next time, and stay informed. Take care.